It's important to understand the difference between authentication and authorization and to know what both of these terms mean. The best way to explain this difference is with the help of an example. Say that you work in an office. When you get to the front door, there is a guard sitting there that has to confirm your identity before allowing you inside the building. After you show the guard your company ID card, he lets you into the building. This process is known as authentication, where the guard is confirming who you are before letting you into the building. Then once you're inside the building, you have a defined access to certain parts of the building, but are not allowed to go into other parts. In this example, say for example you work in the Human Resources Department. You would not have access to the Finance or Records departments. If you try to swipe your card and enter those sections of the building, you would be denied entry. In other words, you are not authorized to go into those areas. This is what is known as authorization, the permission and scope of access defined for or given to you. Authentication and authorization can be summed up like so. Authentication is simply the process of confirming that you are who you say you are, and authorization is what comes after authentication and defines exactly what you are and aren't allowed to do. Before we go into the concept of zero trust and what it is, let's talk about the way we've been trusting workers and companies in the past. Historically, companies define a perimeter, which we can say in this example is the company. And then within that perimeter, the company knows that the devices that are connected are secure and trustworthy. If a device from outside the network tries to connect, then that device is obviously untrustworthy and is not allowed to connect, or even if it is not given any access to any sensitive or critical information. Though this model worked well traditionally, with the advent of remote work and freelancers, this model has become more and more difficult to sustain and impose. Though it can still be maintained via VPN, it is a software load on the computer of the remote worker for one, and mobile access is an even bigger challenge still. Worse still, having third-party devices connecting to your secure network can wreak utter havoc, because should any virus or malware find its way in, the entire network is now compromised. As the trusted perimeter model became more and more difficult to maintain and implement, the concept of zero trust came about. In the model of zero trust, all the users are assumed untrustworthy unless proven otherwise. Trust is based off of identity as opposed to location. In this model, you assign a user just enough access to do their job and no more than that. Furthermore, if the identity is proven, then where the user is logging in from is irrelevant. Whether that's from within the company itself or an island off the Caribbean, the experience remains the same. The model of access allows for more centralized management and simplifies things a lot, and is found in Azure Active Directory. You can centrally control access with conditional access policies and only allow access from approved and managed devices. Multi-factor authentication is a process in which users are prompted during the sign-in process for an additional form of identification, such as a code on their cell phone or a fingerprint scan. If you only use a password to authenticate a user, it leaves an insecure vector for attack. If the password is weak or has been exposed elsewhere, an attacker could be using it to gain access. When you require a second form of authentication, security is increased because this additional factor isn't something that's easy for an attacker to obtain or duplicate. Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication works by requiring two or more of the following authentication methods: something you know, typically a password; something you have, such as a trusted device that's not easily duplicated like a phone or hardware key; or something that you are, which is to say biometrics like a fingerprint or a face scan or retina. Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication can also further secure password reset. When users register themselves for Azure AD multi-factor authentication, they can also register for self-service password reset in one step. Administrators can choose forms of secondary authentication and configure challenges for MFA based on configuration decisions. You don't need to change applications and services to use Azure AD multi-factor authentication. The verification prompts are part of the Azure AD sign-in, which automatically requests and processes the MFA challenge when needed. The following additional forms of verification can be used with Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication: Microsoft's Authenticator app, Windows Hello for Business, a FIDO2 security key, OAuth hardware tokens, OAuth software tokens, SMS, and voice calls. The modern security perimeter now extends beyond an organization's network to include user and device identity. Organizations can use identity-driven signals as part of their access control decisions. Conditional access brings signals together to make decisions and enforce organizational policies. Azure Active Directory conditional access is at the heart of the new identity-driven control plane. Conditional access policies at their simplest are if-then statements. If a user wants to access a resource, then they must complete an action. For example, a payroll manager wants to access the payroll application and is required to do multi-factor authentication to access it. Administrators are faced with two primary goals: to empower users to be productive wherever and whenever, and to protect the organization's assets. You can use conditional access policies to apply the right access controls when needed to keep your organization secure. Common signals that conditional access can take into account when making a policy decision include the following signals: user or group membership. Policies can be targeted to specific users and groups, giving administrators fine-grained control over access. IP location information. Organizations can create trusted IP address ranges that can be used when making policy decisions. Administrators can specify entire countries and regions' IP ranges to block or allow traffic from. Devices. Users with devices of specific platforms or marked with a specific state can be used when enforcing conditional access policies. You can use filters for devices to target policies to specific devices, like privileged access workstations. Applications. Users attempting to access specific applications can trigger different conditional access policies. Real-time and calculated risk detection. Signal integration with Azure AD Identity Protection allows conditional access policies to identify risky sign-in behavior. Policies can then force users to change their password, do multi-factor authentication to reduce their risk level, or block access until an administrator takes manual action. Microsoft Defender for cloud applications. This enables user applications to access and sessions to be monitored and controlled in real time, increasing visibility and control over access to and activities done within your cloud environment. Features like multi-factor authentication are a great way to secure your organization, but users often get frustrated with the additional security layer on top of having to remember their passwords. Passwordless authentication methods are more convenient because the password is removed and replaced with something you have, plus something you are, or something you know. Each organization has different needs when it comes to authentication. Microsoft Global Azure and Azure Government offer the following three passwordless authentication options that integrate with Azure Active Directory: Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator, and FIDO2 security keys. Windows Hello for Business is ideal for information workers that have their own designated Windows PC. The biometric and PIN credentials are directly tied to the user's PC, which prevents access from anyone other than the owner. With public key infrastructure integration and built-in support for single sign-on, Windows Hello for Business provides a convenient method for seamlessly accessing corporate resources on-premises and in the cloud. You can also allow your employee's phone to become a passwordless authentication method. You may already be using the Authenticator app as a convenient multi-factor authentication option in addition to a password. You can also use the Authenticator app as a passwordless option. The Authenticator app turns any iOS or Android phone into a strong, passwordless credential. Users can sign into any platform or browser by getting a notification on their phone, matching a number displayed on the screen to the one on their phone, and then using their biometric or PIN to confirm. The FIDO or Fast Identity Online Alliance helps to promote open authentication standards and reduce the use of passwords as a form of authentication. FIDO2 is the latest standard that incorporates the Web Authentication standard. FIDO2 security keys are an unphishable standard-based passwordless authentication method that can come in any form factor. Fast Identity Online is an open standard for passwordless authentication. FIDO allows users and organizations to leverage the standards to sign into their resources without a username or password using an external security key or a platform key built into a device. Users can register and then select a FIDO2 security key at the sign-in interface as their main means of authentication. These FIDO2 security keys are typically USB devices but could also use Bluetooth or NFC. With a hardware device that handles the authentication, the security of an account is increased and there's no password that could be exposed or guessed. FIDO2 security keys can be used to sign into their Azure Active Directory or hybrid Azure Active Directory, join Windows 10 devices, and get single sign-on to their cloud and on-premise resources. Users can also sign into supported browsers. FIDO2 security keys are a great option for enterprises who are very security sensitive or have scenarios or employees who aren't willing or able to use their phone as a second factor. With Azure Active Directory, you can easily enable collaboration across organizational boundaries by using Azure Active Directory B2B feature. Guest users from other tenants can be invited by administrators or by other users. This capability also applies to social identities such as Microsoft accounts. You can also easily ensure that guest users have appropriate access. You can ask the guests themselves or a decision maker to participate in an access review and recertify or attest to the guest's access. The reviewers can give their input on each user's needs for continued access. Based on suggestions from Azure AD, when an access review is finished, you can then make changes and remove access for guests who no longer need it. Azure Active Directory domain services provide managed domain services such as domain join, group policy, lightweight directory access protocol, and Kerberos NTLM authentication. You use these domain services without the need to deploy, manage, and patch domain controllers in the cloud. An Azure ADDS managed domain lets you run legacy applications in the cloud that can't use modern authentication methods or where you don't want directory lookups to always go back to an on-premises ADDS environment. You can lift and shift those legacy applications from your on-premises environment into a managed domain without needing to manage the ADDS environment in the cloud. Azure ADDS integrates with your existing Azure AD tenant. This integration lets users sign into services and applications connected to the managed domain using their existing credentials. You can also use existing groups and user accounts to secure access to resources. These features provide a smoother lift and shift of on-premises resources to Azure. Single sign-on, or SSO, is an authentication method that enables users to sign into various softwares and systems with just a single ID and password. SSO allows IT departments to administrate a single identity that can access many machines and cloud services. Login for SSO is seamless, where a user once logs into their primary directory. As soon as they utilize the software, they are presented with a login screen.
After logging into the Azure portal, we'll head to the Active Directory. So over here we have the default directory and here we have the overview page. We can see the basic information about our Active Directory such as name, tenant ID, primary domain, license, number of users, groups, applications and devices active. Below that we can see a lot of options that we can choose from, including the documentation. So the first important feature that we have in the Azure Active Directory is the users. From here we can see all the users which have been created in our account. Currently we have one user active. If we click on the user, we can see all its details, including the principal name, user type, user creation time, as well as its assigned roles and status. Next, we have the groups option. So when we click here, we can see if there are any roles available. So we can create a new group. Click on new group. So here we can specify the group type, then the group name. We'll call it test group. The group description. We'll click on create. And our group has been successfully created. So if we refresh it, we can see our test group over here. When we go inside our group, you can see the details like membership type, source, type, and object ID. You can also see if there are any members associated with the group. Next, we have roles and administrators, which can be associated to a particular group. Next, we have the members. When we add members, so over here we can search for a particular user. We click on this user, then click on select. Now this member has been added successfully. We can see our member over here. So these were some of the features of Azure Active Directory. There are many other tasks that you can accomplish with the Azure Active Directory, but I hope this lab helps you in getting started. If you have any queries or feedback, do not hesitate to leave it in the comment section. Thank you and have a nice day.